has to do is suck that into his lungs and he will feel great, and that's what we need to do. We need to put that new power that we have into action. What God has done for us is the basis and stimulus for all that we need to do for God. We don't serve God because we don't have an example. We don't serve God because we're great people. We serve God because he loves us. We are able to obey him because he's given us new life. He's done all this for us, and we can do then things for God. Verse 11, though, suggests that there's an intermediate step between who we are and what we're supposed to do. That intermediate step talked about coming to grips with this truth that Paul has been teaching, the truth that says that we need to constantly, and this is all the days of your life. Your Christian life didn't stop, when you were 6. Your Christian life didn't stop when you graduated high school. Your Christian life didn't stop when you moved into the care center. We have to constantly regard ourselves as dead to sin. This is something we do every day of our lives. Consider ourselves dead to sin so that we can live for Christ. That's what connects us with what we are and what we should be doing. As we can constantly consider ourselves dead to sin, we can put into action what already is in existence in our lives. That is, we have the power to avoid sin, the power over sin. Then in verse 12 through 13, Paul moves into this realm of action. He says, we must not let sin reign in our lives. He has told us we have to resist sin, we have to fight it, we have to do this every day, constantly being aware that Christ has done this for us. Now we're faced with a tension here. I hope you've noticed this. And the tension is between, that Paul has said that sin does not reign in our lives. The other half of that tension is don't let sin reign in your life. So he says one thing here, and he says something differently here, because I would think that if sin doesn't reign in our lives, why would Paul ask us to fight it? There's a tension going on there. Well, victory over sin does not mean that we don't sin or we're not tempted to sin. Victory over sin has won for us something that must be appropriated. We have power over sin, but you have to accept it, just like you accepted God's justification on your behalf. It's a matter of trust. You have to accept what God has given to you. You have to appropriate it into your life. Putting away those sins is going to plague us all of our lives. It is not an automatic process. It's not like house cleaning. My house gets cleaned automatically. I don't know. I just come home on Saturday night and it's clean. It's amazing. But sin is not that way. All the wives are going, wait. Sin does not go away automatically. You have to work at it. You got to go clean the windowsills. You got to wash the clothes. You've got to vacuum the floor. It is not an automatic process. We have to choose to put into practice what we have in principle. We have to put into actuality what is there in theory. Yes, God has made us free from sin, but you have to practice that. You have to put that into action. Verse 13 makes the same point in a different way. Paul brings before us this picture of all the parts of our bodies and saying, all of these parts of your body, you need to bring them to God and you need to give them to God. And let him use them the way he wants them to be used. We must take each of those parts, whether they're abilities, whether they're talents, whether they're skills, whether they're experiences, and let God use them. This is, I think her name is Brittany Hamilton. She is the basis of this new movie called Soul Surfer, a movie that I've been told to recommend to you by some very people that I trust, called Soul Surfer. She is a young lady who was out surfing one day, and a shark took a bite out of her surfboard. And then the shark took a bite out of her arm, and she no longer has her arm. But she's used this. She has offered the parts of her body, their skills that she has, to bring God glory. She is saying, God, yeah, you took away my arm, but I'm going to let you use that in any way that you want to. And God is. And thousands of people are going to see this movie. I don't know if it's come to our theaters yet, has it? Soul Surfer? No? It has? Have you seen it? No? Okay. Not yet? Okay. We have to take each of the parts of our lives, our talents, our abilities, everything, and give them to God, and He's going to use them. Righteousness is the new standard of our behavior. I picked these little group of people because they're all green. They're all one color. Righteousness is the new standard. Does that mean that you lose who you are? No, because we've got short people and tall people and male people and women people and small people and children people, and we got people who you are. But all of us need to line up with God's standard of righteousness. All of us are asked to take who we are and be righteous before God. And then, just in case you start thinking it's all about you and all that you have to do and you presenting your bodies and you giving to the Lord and you doing this and you having to work out your salvation, God reminds us that sin will not be your master. He promises us. You know, our lives are just like this, you know, the concrete flooring here. It is supported by beams, it's supported by trusses, it's supported by flooring, it's supported by all kinds of things. God says, yes, you have the ability, but you need to work it out. And He supports us with this promise that sin will not dominate us. Why will sin not dominate us? Because we are not under law, but under grace. God has freed us. We are under God's grace in this world. Now, Paul is not saying that there are no commandments that you are no longer enslaved to. He doesn't say that there aren't going to be any more rules. There are rules, and we are responsible to obey them. But what he is saying is that sin no longer dominates us, and we can obey God. We can be the people that God intended us to be. Because we stand under the new covenant. The old covenant has no longer control over us, and we have freedom in Christ. Paul has presented the law, the Mosaic law, as a power that leads us to sin. We're just drawn to sin because we see what's wrong and then we go do it. We're enslaved to it. But under the new covenant, God says we are free. And we must be set free from that law. And we are in Jesus Christ. I'd like to talk a little bit about the old self and the new self. Some of you remember Mad Magazine and Spy versus Spy, and they were always blowing each other up, and one would get the upper hand and the other would get then the other one would win. Well, sometimes I think this opinion is found in a lot of Christians, that good is there just as evil is there, and that is, if you have a God, you have to have a Satan. But that's not the way the world works. God can exist without Satan. You know, Satan is in no way necessary to God's plan. He's there, but God is in charge. So let's talk about this old self and new self. In verse 6, Paul proclaims that the old self has been crucified with Christ. There are two very popular options. And frankly, I don't know that there's a lot of difference between the two options. And then I'm going to present a third one. And frankly, I think good and great believers believe all three of these options. And there's just not a lot of difference, and I see a lot of good in both of them. The first option is the two nature approaches, where there's the bad old self and then there's the good new self, and they just kind of fight each other. What Paul teaches, according to this view, is that the believer's old sin nature has been dealt a death blow, a mortal wound, but it has not killed our old self. It still is in existence. That nature still exists, but it's no longer dominant. You know, this is Kobe Bryant. He still exists. He's still playing in the league, but, you know, they bounced out of the playoffs. So he might exist still, but he's no longer dominant. Like sin in our life, our old nature. Still there, but no longer the player that he once was. Progress then in the Christian life comes to you as you use spiritual gifts, spiritual disciplines, to foster the growth of the new nature and the gradual death of the old. A lot of preachers, when we talk about this view, we talk about that there are two dogs that live inside of you. You know, there's that old dog and there's that new dog. And then what